for anybody who was at TBM conference in Miami this year, Howard and I did a session on stage about myths and reality. We wanted to modify that a bit here, and we wanted to focus on hype versus reality. And like when you look at hype, you can have positive hype and you can have negative hype. And I'll give you two quick examples. On the positive side, I mean, excuse me, on the negative side of hype, back in 1943, Thomas Watson of IBM fame was noted for saying that he thought that the market for computers was going to be five per year as a maximum. And, look, he didn't have a great view of how small computers would get and how pervasive and how compute would expand and Moore's law and things like that. But, that's something on the hype side that missed on the downside. On the positive side, this AI CapEx build out that you're seeing, if you think of big build outs that we've done in the past, the moon launch, if you look at electrification of America, if you look at the build out of highways and things like that, those are all things that had significant contributions to GDP. Data that we have shows that AI build out is bigger than all of them. So, that we're in this moment with AI where there is a whole lot of hype. You're seeing stock prices move for many different companies, usually to the downside as more AI capabilities are revealed. So that's what we're going to try and look at here. And one of the big things that we've started to see is that there's a whole movement towards the concept of technology value. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the recent FinOps announcement. And in that FinOps announcement, a lot of people have been talking about the move to tech value. And we think that's a positive thing for us because we believe that two things. One, it is all about tech value. And so the people that are moving forward with whether it's AI or whether it's just anything to do with core technology, these are the people that are going to get ahead, the ones that are most focused on value. The other thing in regards to that FinOps announcement is that we love working with FinOps. We think they have a great set of tools and everything. We're going to continue to work with them, but we want to do it in such a way where we are still the overarching umbrella that brings together not only FinOps, but we bring together SPM, we bring together CSDM, we bring together ITAM, ITSM. And so what you're going to see from the council side as we go through 2026 are a few things. One, we are starting to build out much more of TBM framework, right? So let me just pop that up here on the screen for the time being. And we'll talk about that just a little bit. I'm sure you guys have seen the framework, but two big things that we're going to try and do in framework is we want to try and get more and more folks focused on this idea of building a practice and a discipline. So the council has approval to bring in a new researcher. So we're going to bulk up Justin's team for anybody that knows Justin. And the whole idea of that is we want to start to build out much more of a practice of knowledge based on how to do TBM. And so you're going to see a whole lot more of that as we move forward. And then the second big thing that we want to try and do through that is we also want to try and start to build out the top end of that as well. And so a big part of that is the CXO side of things. So as we go into this year, you're going to see a lot more for the practitioners around how do I do TBM, but we're also going to give a lot more of the strategic direction. And so we're working on now on a lot of the plans around hybrid cloud and ultimately AI. And so going back into framework, we're going to be working on top end CXO level decision-making framework, building out a lot of the AI and the hybrid cloud story up there. Practitioner level, we're going to be doing multiple things. One, research on how to do things, how to get programs started, how to move them quicker, how to innovate as you move along. And then the other element of that, we're going to start to build out different layers of our education program to support that. Some of it you're going to start to see on YouTube. So Justin and our Asia Pac leader, Zahid Irain, They're going to start to record videos that we will put on to YouTube. So you'll be able to go in, we'll be able to create playlists, but through those, we're going to take both framework and taxonomy, and we're going to help people, whether you're just getting started or whether you're further down the line, with everything from cost pools up the resource towers, thinking about solutions and how you start to drive results out there. So we have a lot of things that we have planned for this year to start to build out value for everybody so that we can keep TBM front and center. Now, the other thing is we go to the AI side. The TBM taxonomy has a lot of utility as we talk to a lot of the ecosystem. And then as we talk to a lot of people in some of our partner organizations as well, one of the things that we've talked about is, where's the world going with agentic AI? And on this agentic AI side of things, when you talk to most folks, you need a semantic layer for how you think about how the rules are going to be set for the agents to work. And I can give you one example of a member who I was talking to recently. This member has been looking at how they are going to use AI for some of their coding requirements. And so while they've been building agents for different part of the coding life cycle, debugging side of it as well, they've also built an agent that is effectively in real time monitoring the economics of the whole operation. And so they're able to go in and at any point in time, see what the cost and the value implications are of this initiative. And they're able to then do in effectively real time, make decisions that enable them to turn up, turn down, turn off, do more, whatever it is around that kind of 3 points around cost, value, and time. And so it's a very innovative pilot that they're doing. But I think this is where you're going to see more of the future, how people are going to be able to take TBM and how they're going to be able to take and connect into the big software providers, whether they're ITFM, FinOps, SPG, and how you're going to be able to quickly use agents to assemble information. But to do that, you need a set of rules. And this is where TBM can be very effective. And one example for that that just came to our attention over the past few days, we were just made aware that Disney, and this is, I can say their name because it was out on LinkedIn, and I'm going to drop it into the chat here real quick. But here we go. It was done by one of the directors of TBM at Disney. He's a member of our CFO for IT and our data work groups. But effectively, what they were doing is they used Taxonomy 5.0 to be able to build agents that they then used to drive a whole set of insights that enabled them to do work that used to take a week, and they were able to do it in an hour. And so I just put this in the chat. It's on LinkedIn. It's a great example of what I'm talking about around positioning TBM as this semantics layer for the ability to do agentic. And then if you do that, then we're also going to work on positioning framework as the contextual layer. So once you get through the idea of semantics of the rules of the road and how information moves and how it's assigned to different categories, you then get to this idea of, okay, what do I do with it? And so this is where the concept of context comes in. Okay, so typically in an architectural diagram, the whole idea of the contextual layer is this is where you're doing, the why. Why am I doing this? And in our sense, it's so I can create business value. So if you take that upper part of the framework, now you're bringing together that CXO suite around technology, finance, and the business. And after you've got past information using the taxonomy and that semantic layer, now it comes up in the contextual layer. And now you start to bring the humans in, and this is where value is created. So a lot of what we'll do as we go through the year will be focused on this upper end of the framework from an agentic perspective. And this is what we're going to do to get some insights on the table in terms of invitational, which we have coming up in May. and then what we're going to do in terms of conference. And to that end, in terms of conference, we're working right now to build out what the theme's going to be and what the agenda is going to be. And we're going to do a real shift. In years gone by, a lot of the themes have been more targeted around the product side of things. And right now, we're making a push to focus more of the breakouts around themes. TBM is all about getting outcomes. And so we want conference to align to those outcomes that you as a membership are trying to do. So we think that there's a great opportunity to link everything we're doing over the next 6 to 8 months and then bring that all to a head when we get to conference. So we're excited what we have in the plan for this year. Howard's team runs what's called the technology economist. And if you think about the job that we're doing within TBM these days, that's really what we're trying to get people to. You know, calling yourself a TBM expert might be selling yourself short. You really want to be a technology economist, right? We're showing people how we're creating output, how we're creating value from technology. And the people that do this the best are going to be the ones that win. I just read another LinkedIn today talking about it from the EA perspective and how EAs really aren't filling that void from a value perspective yet, but they need to. And you're going to see we're going to start up an EA community. We're doing more work with the Open Group, and we've always had a great relationship with SAP Lean IX. So this idea of working with Howard and the technology economist just makes complete sense. We've got a new service out here called performance benchmarking. What I really like about it is this first bit around an IT intensity score. I think a lot of people try to talk about like what's an absolute metric that pinpoints how I'm delivering IT for my organization. And Howard and his team have done a fantastic job building an intensity score that looks like a normal distribution, but based on where you are on that distribution, you can see how you're doing versus peers. You're able to compare across the different peer sets that they have, and you can see how you're doing of your technology spend versus the margin, the value you're creating, and see if you are, highly efficient, if you're very inefficient. And it's one of those where it's kind of the Goldilocks zone, right? Where you really want to be in the normal distribution. You don't want to be on either end really, because you might be spending too much or too little, not getting enough return. But what we typically find on that intensity score can be very revealing for companies. And then beyond that, we have a bunch of TBM based benchmarks around run versus change, tower cost. It links to the whole taxonomy. We can go into cloud, AI, security, and there's great peer sets to help you compare against.
But what IT intensity was about, just let me give you the initial background, is folks really like to look at IT as a percent of revenue and IT as a percent of operating expense as really independent benchmarks to use. And both of those are pretty inappropriate because, for example, in banking right now, banks did great when they're doing trading. So if their IT spending stayed fixed, IT as a percent of revenue would go down, and you wouldn't know why. As a matter of fact, when you look at these big macro numbers, you don't understand what part of them is running the business or investing so high and low. And the same thing as IT as a percent of operating expense. Boards historically see that IT as a percent of operating expenses going up and say, my God, you're spending too much money on IT. So basically, believe it or not, I have a library of 9 million data points going back to the 90s. And I started looking around at IT margin and business performance, how for-profit businesses measure themselves. And I found out that if you look at IT as a percent of revenue and operating expense sort of at the same time, and you examine their behaviors. For example, if you're becoming more digital, you'd expect IT as a percent of operating expense to go up because you're more IT intense in terms of your spending, but that'll drive operating expense down. And IT as a percent of revenue, if you're getting revenue lift, will go. So basically, the computation is a hypotenuse of the triangle. And Matt, do you have the diagram up? Because I'm sort of flying blind here. But if you have the diagram up.
Yeah. So
okay, good.
I'm on a hotel internet. Patricia, could you call the slide up for us and see if it works from your side?
Okay, but I'll explain it to you. If you take a look at, he said there's a 9x9 area, cells, and what happens is in those cells is a parabola across the middle. And fundamentally, we do a curve fit to see who has the maximum margin and where that hits and what that looks like versus IT intensity. So you get this parabolic curve going around like this, and the data points of that parabola, that's called the performance frontier. And depending on your placement, whether you're above or below the performance frontier, you can get an interpretation. So if you're at the performance frontier, which is the IT intensity and the peak margin, and you're below it, it has a strange interpretation. It says, you're probably investing the right amount of IT, but you're not getting the yield. Oh, I see. Well, Matt, I see you in the background there. You're not getting the yield. If you're above that line, that means you're overperforming. But if you're down at the bottom left, that means your IT intensity is low and you're not hitting that parabola, which means you're not getting the value. If you're beating it, oh, hello, look at this thing. And you're beating it. So if you look at zone 7, for example, zone 7 means low tech intensity and below average margins. A lot of firms are out in zones 9, 6, and 3. So if you're in zone 9, that means you have massive high T intensity, but you're not getting the yield of your investment. Zone 6 means that you're sort of beating it, and 3 means, boy, you have high IT intensity and high yield. But where companies really want to understand and place themselves is this is based on real data by sector, by peer group, and zone 5 says if you're hitting there, you're right about the optimal IT intensity and you're getting the expected yield. This is almost like having an investment portfolio. And looking at the image right now, you take a look at these positionings, and the tool we have, the Ask TBM, takes some high-level data and places it there, and it really answers the question, are you getting an appropriate yield from your IT investment? And this is against margin. And it puts you in a diagnostic box that gives you some idea. And it doesn't say you're spending too much or too little. It's talking about the yield side for the level of what your investment is. So it's pretty simple. It's a quick diagnostic, but it's the only diagnostic in the world. It's even patented, by the way, of all strange things. And the patent includes the Pythagorean theorem. If you ever want to know who has the patent of the Pythagorean theorem, it's not Pythagoras. It's apparently me, according to the U.S. Patent Office. But this allows you to get a 9-zone view. Are you getting the appropriate yield from your technology investment? It doesn't tell you what you need to do. By the way, zone 8 is the most interesting because you're probably at the optimal level because you're above the peak of the parabola, but you're not getting the appropriate yield from it. Usually that's with companies that are funding too many projects, and because of politics, they spread the money around, give everybody a little bit, and they don't have critical mass to get their work done. So I know this sounds like sort of an obtuse, quick observation, but it's the only tool available that with just a few pieces of data, it can give you an idea, are you getting the appropriate yield of your IT investment? And this chart is operating margin, it could be return on equity, a whole bunch of other things. So I'll turn it back to Matt. As my wife
Howard, I have a question for you.
I was going to say, if my wife came in, she said that I could probably talk if nobody was in a room anyway, but I'll shut up. I was a professor. Matt, back to you.
Yeah, Howard, here's my question to you based on this intensity analysis. So how do you see companies winning with this when they're using TBM? Do you see connections between intensity and TBM?
Oh, yeah, actually, TBM and the transparency you have with that gives you an idea of where the money is going. So if you drive down a level deeper, you can start to understand what you're spending in terms of keeping the business running versus investing. So keeping the business running may keep you at a level, but investing and making the difference. And underneath that, when you get down to the basic kind of tower model, you can see where the money is going and where you may not be investing enough to get the margin, where you're underperforming and where you're overspending. So TBM, actually, if I had to rename TBM, I would call it TOM. Isn't technology and business management? This is about technology and outcome management. And this is really what it does. And that's the essence. When I was there when TBM stuff was born way back at the early days of this in 2008 or something. And that's what this is about. It's always been about connecting the dots. And TBM supplies the needed transparency. So you can see where the money is. It supplies a standard so you can benchmark and you compare. So this is, I mean, when I was growing up, there was Wonder Bread that would build strong bodies in 12 ways or whatever they advertise it. This builds strong technology bodies in multiple dimensions, from the input where the money is going through the layers of the model, all the way up to business outcomes.
Now, Howard,
that answered that.
Yeah, it does. So let me ask you this question, because when you were talking about the different boxes that people are in as we're looking at it, in a perfect world, I'd be in one, but that's really hard to get to. And I probably shouldn't aspire to that because the marginal gains can be very expensive. But, how do people overperform? Like, what is it, or how do I at least get to that curve? Because when you look at any of these curves, you're going to have people that are above and you're going to have people that are below. But what are some of the big things that you're seeing that are holding people back from being able to at least hit the performance frontier, if not exceed it?
Yeah, the key really becomes is almost having, I hate to put it this way, almost surgically precise business cases. And it's easier to write a business case than to see you get the results. So way back when I worked with Nolan Norton and Company, and those are one of the classic firms in technology management coming out of the guys in the Harvard Business School and the Balanced Scorecard. The issue is when you put together a business case and a plan, you need to understand where the benefits show up. Are they going to show up in changing your operational performance? Are they going to change your customer intimacy? Are they getting new products to market? And you need to understand that. But you have to have a plan to harvest the benefits. So the companies that are overperforming are literally focusing on aiming at the business case benefits and managing their projects, not just on time and on cost, but on scope and on value. So the other aspects, people manage projects on time and cost and they worry about that. No. Are you maintaining the scope? Are you getting the value? And where is the value? Is it growing revenue, protecting revenue, avoiding costs, cutting costs? Has to do with other aspects of what you're doing with your customers' net promoter score. So I know this sounds like a long answer, but you have to have a target of where you're going and surgically precise and understand where that value is and managing to that value, but manage your projects and on time, on cost. And the business case is the other side. Are you on the scope or you're on value? And monitoring in real time if anything has gone on that will change the business case. It's almost like being a venture capitalist. Should I stay with this thing or dump it and get out of it? So it's really managing this stuff backwards from the outcome side. And that's the top performers. The bottom performers, give money. It's a wing and a prayer. They hope you're giving you money to do something and hope it comes out. And the other part of this thing, and you may have touched it, is just believing hype. Believing if you wave AI all over this thing, you'll have a glorious future because it just doesn't work that way. How's that
So let me
for a
ask,
condemning statement?
that's a good one. So let me ask you this question. Since I started talking to folks about hype, and I relayed the Thomas Watson prediction of 5 computers per year. But I also talked about the AI CapEx build out being built bigger than electrification and the moon launch and some other big initiatives that have happened over the last 100 years. On the hype side, I think you've done some work further on this AI CapEx build out. Would you think it would be good to share that with the group here?
Yeah, I'll tell you something pretty interesting about it. And first of all, I taught AI for years, and I believe it has a great future. The problem with AI is probably the expectations are out beyond what the current promise is. But what Matt is referring to, if you look at the press, you're talking about billions or trillions of dollars being invested in data centers on one side. The other data you can see from analyst firms that I'm affiliated with, Gartner, they talk about worldwide IT spending on the supply side. Those are the vendors of being about 5 or 6 trillion and maybe growing. So imagine on the supply side, let's say you have about 5 trillion before the AI stuff kicked in with the data centers. What does that support? That supports a worldwide gross domestic product of about $130 trillion in GDP. So that $130 trillion in GDP can consume, let's say, 5 or 6 trillion dollars on the supply side as things have been going. Add 2 trillion of all these investments these companies are making in the data centers and everything else onto the supply side. So if you look at the ratios, that 130 trillion is supporting about 5 trillion on supply side. That's about 4%. You add 2 trillion on top of that for all these new investments. Imagine it feeds 4% of a GDP growth. The GDP would have to grow from 130 trillion to 180 trillion to be able to consume all that money. So that's the buy side. That's where the people, you folks on the phone are. You're using IT services. The GDP is not going to grow that fast. So almost the AI bubble is almost designed to break because the average IT budget increase, and each of you on the call today, the meeting today, no matter your increase. The average worldwide across all sectors is about 3.1%. IT inflation is almost 7%. That's the increase in salaries, hardware, software, and everything else. So most companies are being eaten alive almost by inflation. And for the GDP and the supply side to grow enough to absorb $2 trillion in data center, ain't going to happen. There's no way. And you already see that OpenAI and Oracle are pulling out of the data centers. So the investment on supply side capabilities has to be consumed somewhere. And the consuming budgets aren't big enough to do this. And again, the average budget is only going by 3.1%. So if you look at that, you'd expect AI spending would blow up. It's just not. So the numbers, you said, this is like, look at the numbers. The numbers don't show that this will work. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with AI. There's something wrong with the expectations. And again, on the supply side, putting $2 trillion in, that's what the SaaS systems are going to run on. That's what the the hyperscalers are going to run on. That's what Microsoft Office and all those tools are going to run on. How the heck are they going to recover that money without raising their prices and driving inflation up further? So that's a technology economic view of this stuff, of supply and demand and how it all matches together. So it's a complex equation.
So Howard, a couple of questions that I'm going to pose to you. And folks, why don't we go to Q&A? If you have questions, put them into the chat and I'll read them to Howard. We've got the first two here, but you know, if you want to come off mute as well, you can do that, but it might be easier through the chat, but either way will be fine. First question, please remind us, how do we define tech intensity?
Okay, tech intensity is really, as I said, looking at multiple variables at once. It's almost like a cross product. And the initial two variables you look at are IT relative to revenue and IT relative to operating expense. And imagine that as sort of a right triangle. IT is a percent of operating expense here, and IT expense of revenue here. And as you become more digital, the IT expense of operating expense grows. And depending what you're doing with your IT to generate revenue stuff changes the bottom. So the hypotenuse stretches. So it's looking at two dimensions at once because any one of these single dimensions doesn't do the job. So it's looking at the relative performance of your technology spend versus revenue and technology spend versus your operating expense. So you can get an idea of what's going on. And that's where the performance frontier, because it's not linear. I've seen papers published that says, we assume as IT percent of revenue goes up, your margin goes up. It doesn't unless you're managing your operating expense. And the operating expense is interesting as long as you're generating the revenue to support your margin. So it's a multi-dimensional view of stuff. So tech intensity really looks at the dimensions of technology spend against two common business measures and its interplay with margin and return on equity and other things. Just think of the triangle model, and that's what it's about. I hope that helps.
Excellent. So here's the second question. The issue / assumption of causality can be tricky, right?
Oh, yeah, because actually that goes back to what I said. I just saw someone publish. They said IT as a percent of revenue doesn't correlate with margin. Well, duh. Yeah, it doesn't, because it's not doing a month. As you're generating revenue, you have to manage your costs. So there's a difference between causality and correlation. And just if your IT intensity goes up, remember I said you have a parabolic curve on the picture Matt showed you? So you're getting high intensity doesn't mean you're getting a high yield. But what that's basically telling you, if you're extremely higher in your intensity versus the best-in-class performer in your sector or peers, then you better beat that curve by a whole lot. And on the lower left, which Matt pointed out, they're companies with low intensity that have very surgically priced business cases, and they're beating the curve. So that curve represents the performance frontier, which is the top best-in-class performers. And this is the last thing I'll say, is when you benchmark yourselves, it's very common, and you go to almost consulting firm or analyst firm, and they'll benchmark you against IT's percent of revenue and operating expense. And some will tell you, gee, you want to be low. You don't want to be low. You want to be tuned so you're getting the return. So low IT expense, there's one consulting firm, if you ask them, what's your average calorie intake a day? They'll say, well, the average person is 200, you might be able to live on 400 calories a day. They don't tell you you're going to drop dead in 10 days because low doesn't always work. So you want to understand. And by the way, if you tell someone, gee, I'm eating 8,000 calories a day, they'll say you're going to die. No, you're running an Olympic marathon, man. You need those calories. So you need the context of the business to frame the benchmarks and understand clearly what best in class means in terms of your company. It could be margin, it could be customer primacy, it could be other things. And that's what you're tuning yourself for, your company goals.
And Howard, one of the stories I tell about benchmarking was when I was doing my CIO job years ago. I was doing a review of benchmarks with the exec team, and first couple I was above the bar, and they're like, "Well, you're gonna have to give that money back." And then I said, "Well, when I get the ones below the bar, are you gonna give me money back?" They didn't appreciate the humor in that, but it was all about context, right? Because there were things that I was over on, but that's because we were investing.
That's right.
Right? There were a couple where we were over because we were inefficient. But same thing on the downside. There were a couple things where we were under and we needed to go invest, but there were other things we were under and it was okay because we weren't, they were some of the things we were doing with on-prem and things like that that we were starting to harvest and things like that. So context is absolutely critical, but the benchmarks are critical too. It's bringing the two together that enables you to tell the story. And this is where getting to your business, and this is the what I call the holy trinity of TBM, being able to integrate technology, business, and finance to make these great decisions. And so benchmark can play a very critical role there. So the
I
other
want to
thing
just jump in that, Matt,
go ahead.
because I don't know who we have at the meeting today, but there are places where we're not talking about business profit. So if you look at outcomes for investments by government, it's going to impact health, education, and welfare. So there are going to be different things that you measure based on technology. So technology influences business, society, and everything else. And each of those has outcomes from technology. And that's what technology economics about. And that's pretty much what the basis of TBM is. I see the word business in there concerns me because it was born out of business, but there are outcomes that are not business outcomes unless you consider the business of government to be improving health, education, and welfare. So I just got to watch what that word means. I'm sorry for interrupting about that, but it's an important
No,
point
it's big ad.
to me.
And Howard, just one thing, you've been alluding to this the whole time, and this was where we were going to start one of the earlier parts of the conversation we had planned. And like I said, Howard and I will find time to walk you guys through a more logical readout of this. Hopefully you're finding value regardless. But Howard, I don't want to bury this lead because I think it's critical, but one of your big findings that you put on stage at ESF was what's happening just when you look at the pattern for industry as a whole. Are we creating value with technology over the last 20 years?
And I don't, we have a panel we can put up, but I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks at, from a business, what margin looked like in 1992, 95, and what margin looks like today on 3,000 or 4,000 companies over time. And most companies' margin were higher. But what I did is I drew an axis with all the technology innovation over 30 years, which is everything from the birth of the internet to e-commerce, and then we had 2005 or so, cloud sort of was born, and then you have things coming up today with chat GTP and stuff like that. And I expected to see that there'd be inflection points. There was no inflection point. Oh, well, yeah. So what happened? This chart shows.
There you go.
Yeah, this shows IT spending versus revenue and operating expense. Go up to another panel, and you see on the bottom has the technology innovations. Can you move up to the panel on number 6? Just go up to that. Keep going. That one, operating margin. I expected, and this is the average of thousands of companies, I expected anytime you had technology innovation on the bottom, I'd watch that curve bounce. No, did not bounce. So in fact, technology is being adopted, and I don't know the moods in your company, but something comes out like cloud, let's get on to cloud. Cloud first. Well, cloud first is gone now. FinOps focused on flat cloud, and it's just a too narrow thing. It's 5% of IT spend in companies is cloud, and you'll see the pure cloud companies now are saying they're not getting the growth anymore. I'm not picking on them, but only 30% of companies that moved on to cloud got any benefit. And some say they moved on to cloud, they didn't. They just pushed all their mainframe off to outsourcing stuff. And if you walk across this thing more, chat GPT and the other stuff, look at all the financial reporting of companies today and see how many reduced their staff because they're using AI. There's a Yiddish word, bupkis, which means nothing at all. And if you look at all the banks and you look at the AI washing right now, people release staff and they say, well, they're doing it because of AI. The evidence is not there yet. So it's pretty interesting. So it's not about being anti-technology, but getting the technology installed doesn't produce the value. It's a question Matt asked earlier. It's about how do you get the benefits from this stuff? And there are organizations that break away from this pattern. But overall, you introduce a technology, you got to have it, you got to be in the game, but you got to make sure it's producing value. And the watchword I use is a lot of companies consider technology choices to be a fashion statement. It's more than a fashion statement. It changes your dynamics if you're using it right. And that goes back to the technology economic view. What is my input in my technology and what's the outcome to the enterprise? I know this sounds like a lot of platitudes, but think about any technology in lifetime that you've had in terms of business and how has it changed the business performance? So everybody's searching for that holy grail. And the holy grail is connecting the input to the outcome. And that's actually true in the global economy too. But and actually, yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, and I was just going to
I'd
make three connections here, Howard, on what you're saying. And I want to give folks one more chance to ask questions. But the three connections would be, so if you take Howard's curve that he showed, that margins have not increased over the last 20, 30 years with all this innovation. The question is anybody winning? Well, obviously there's people at the top that are winning, and that's where we went to our technology intensity conversation. And when Howard was talking through intensity, he talked about what you need to do to win. So there are things out there that if you're subscribing to this view of technology economists, you really start to think about what it is that can differentiate you. And this is the third connection point. This is TBM. And so that ability to use TBM to create the transparency and then ultimately help you then deliver that business value. Those are the three steps that you have to be able to rationalize and walk through to get yourself above the curve, not just sitting there running to stand still. So keep that in mind. Do you want to add something?
I was just going to add to that because this is the averages. Like in banking, things broke away from the curve. Those are the fintechs. There are different species of business. They have wildly high IT intensity and wildly high margins. You'll find that companies that don't adopt the technology, they fall off the bottom of the curve. And you fall off the bottom of the curve because you're not playing the game because you have to do it to be competitive. But this is sort of the baseline, and it relates even back to our technology intensity model. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but it doesn't mean it has not produced value. It means you have to plan to produce value to get the yield from technology that's consistent with what your business needs. And underneath that, you need pinnings of what I call agile economics. And agile economics means that your company is engineered so that its performance can operate successfully in a wide range of geopolitical and business conditions. That's a whole other thing. And the example I use for that is a weird one. I'm in Florida right now, and if you're familiar with Florida, when it hits 40 degrees, the iguanas start falling out of the trees like rain because they can't take the bottom of the market for temperature. So, make sure your company is not an IT iguana. You know what the bottom is before you sort of fall out of the tree. That must sound pretty weird, but anyway, that's that. I do a lot of analysis of government. I actually analyzed every state in the federal government, and I use the word outcome. So you have to take a look at what your mission is and what outcomes are. So in education, you're looking at graduation rates and retention and stuff like that. In health, you're looking at everything from improving things. So, U.S. has problems with mortality and stuff like that, and even repeat hospital visits and things like that. And in welfare, it has to do with national security and stuff like that. Big category. But where would you see the outcomes and what are the inputs? But the interesting thing, the other metric I look like when people say what's going on, I'll just give you a quick global picture. If you look at technology spending per capita versus GDP per capita, you go around the world, GDP per capita ranges from the highest to the lowest about 150 to 1. Tech spending per capita ranges about 450 to 1. So there's massive digital disparity. And if you look at the United States, it's very interesting. And again, I don't know if you're a government agency or not, but there's big spreads between technology spending per capita and the outcomes you're getting. And this is going to say pretty damning, but most tech budgets in government are not focused on what the investment is needed to get the outcome. They're ruled by politics. So actually the highest technology per capita in the US is Hawaii. The next is Alaska. Lowest down is Alabama and Mississippi and things like that. So I have a lot of data on that stuff, and you can always, I don't know if our email addresses are out there, but I'm howard.rubin@rubinworldwide.com. I'm always pleased to share data, but it's getting the outcome of what you're trying to get out of your government spending, whether it's to get better throughput in Department of Motor Vehicles, which is a sore point of mine always, but it's about increasing general welfare and education quality. So we have a lot of data on it. And I was going to say, if you want an interesting example to look at, JP Morgan had been a client of mine for years, and it's not about banking, but they were pressed to create an Investor Day presentation that showed how they're getting value out of their IT, and that goes back to 2022 when they're spending $14 billion on IT. But the value to look at, if you can pull their Investor Day report from 2022 on global technology, it basically shows that over time, they created an interesting engine. They knew that if they continue to fund optimization through modernization of their infrastructure becomes more efficient, and those savings get channeled to investment. So they developed their own sort of annuity engine to keep improving these things. And in the report, you'll see how they actually had to show to the shareholders of where they're investing and where to find the outcome and when. So it's a good model that you could use in general. But that's where we talk about technology economics now, and not about IT finance is critical, but it's not about categorizing things as capitalization. It's all important. You need all that kind of stuff, but you need the input to outcome model that focuses on what you're trying to get out of this stuff. And as you say, you're sort of suffering there because people don't understand all this. So they give you an allocation and want you to do with it, but modernization becomes part of it. And when you talk about run the business versus change the business, with a taxonomy I developed maybe in the 90s, change the business modernization is there. Cyber stuff, data, that's all part of your investment to create the architecture and infrastructure for it. So that sounds like I'm running for office and preaching, but then you have some of the basic ideas there. But I'm saying you can look at good examples by looking at the early investor days of JP Morgan. And if you follow them through, you'll get to see what happens when they went to cloud and how, until they got it managed carefully, it blew up their model. Okay.
All right, folks. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a great day, and hope to see you soon.